Hi everybody, it's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, The Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Joanne Richards. We're broadcasting live from Scottsdale, Arizona, where we just attended the 24th UFO Congress. So we're excited to be with you tonight. I have laryngitis, as you can probably tell, and so Dr. Lessin is going to do most of the talking, and I'm going to pass this on to Sasha. Take it away, dear.
Okay, this is a very important show that we're sharing today. We are going to be examining a terrible thing that our clandestine military has inflicted upon our citizens. And thanks to President Carter, who had some good in his heart and had asked a tremendous hero to lead his Delta Force to right the wrong, things got a little bit better. And so we're going to have today Joanne Richards, who is going to tell us about herself and her husband, Captain Mark Richards, who the hero of the Battle of Dulce, where hostages were prisoners, actually, of the Zetas were held in a prison underground at Dulce. So, Joanne, if you would tell us a little bit about yourself and how you met Mark and how this the information unfolded and just what happened in the build-up and battle of Dulce.
All right, I'll tell you what I can. I don't have any notes with me, but I think I have a lot of it in my head. My name is Joanne Richards. I'm Executive Director of Earth Defense Headquarters, an educational nonprofit based in Northern California near San Francisco. And I am married to Captain Mark Richards. He is a former Navy captain, and he was in Air Force Special Forces. And let's see, where do we begin? We met in the fall of 1997, where, how do I put this? For those of you who don't know us, he's been in prison for over 30 years for something he didn't do, to keep him out of the hair of the shadow government that's currently in power, basically. And I met him when a roommate of mine came home one day and said, "Oh, I met this really smart guy, really nice guy. He was visiting his mom. Would you like to meet him?" And by then I'd already been to prison to visit her husband and a couple other people, so the prison part did not scare me. And I said, sure, smart would be a novel concept in somebody I would date. And so that was great. We started writing. Yeah, I know. He's far smarter than anybody else I've ever met, let alone dated and married. So we started writing. Then a couple months later, we started visiting, and that was 17 years ago, more than that. And I've been visiting him ever since. We courted for about 5 years and got married in July of 2002. So we've been married 12 years. And after a few years, as part of all the big family history he was writing, he said, I don't even think he said out loud, he just had me start reading more and more of his stuff, and he was revealing that he used to be involved with the secret space program. And one of the reports he just kind of gave me and didn't say anything about it was this report about Dulce, and I just kept it on the shelf. And, a couple of years later, I was having my own booth at a UFO conference, and somebody bought it, and then she goes, "Oh my gosh, did you read this?" And I go, "No, I've never really read it." And she goes, "You have to read this. It's really awful." So I finally read it. I knew it was about a secret base that had something to do with aliens in New Mexico, and that there had been a battle there, and that was okay. But I never read how horrific it was. And so what I have is a report that Mark was asked to help edit. I don't know exactly when, but it was presented to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 2001, shortly after 9/11. So I think about December of 2001. And the military had been hearing and finding out that researchers, more and more interest was coming out about this place, and researchers and investigators had been finding more about Dulce, and they were starting to reveal what they'd been finding. And so that was becoming more public. So they decided they needed to put this report together for the Joint Chiefs of Staff just so they'd know what was going on. So the report I have, which is not the complete set of information that they had to work with to begin with, because number one, they didn't want the Joint Chiefs of Staff to have all of that information, and they certainly didn't want the public to have certain pieces. So, but what I have is there's a section on what came out from the researchers and the investigations. There's a section on the facility, where it's located, approximately like how many species of aliens were there, and who was talking about the Greys being the managers of the facility, and the different kinds of experiments that were going on there, the mind control, the breeding, the genetic experiments, and something about the different levels, and the farther you went down into the facility, the worse it got. And it also goes into a few of the government UFO-related operations and missions, and things they were studying about UFOs and aliens. And it goes into like the Genome Project, how that kind of was a result of what happened at Dulce. And the last section is about a rescue mission that my husband was involved with in the fall of 1979. He won't tell me the date, which is fine. I know it probably is close to the time when Phil Schneider was probably there, because it sounds like Phil Schneider might have been rescued by some of the same Delta Force who happened to be there when Mark was there. Because I know there was Delta Force as part of it. There were like a couple or three branches of the military involved with this. And there were several teams that went in. Someone in through the tunnel, someone in through the air shafts. Mark and his teams went in through, they followed a UFO that the military had been tracking, so they'd know where the entrance was. And that particular entrance was covered up by a holographic image of the desert. So they tracked it. They were able to go in right after that craft. And he was actually flying an experimental X-22 that hadn't been tested very much, but that's how he and his team got in there. They landed. The interesting thing is he was only there for about an hour. You go in, you rescue as many people as you can, you fight off as many aliens as you have to. They blew up a major portion of the base, which basically closed it down till I think he said about 1993. And most of what was going on there was moved either off planet or to other bases such as Pine Gap. The report does say that these kind of bases were also in other parts of the world. And without looking at my notes, I don't know exactly where. I know at least one of them was in one of the former USSR countries, that end with a stan, but I don't know which one. So he doesn't talk about it. He rarely will talk about this, partly maybe because of what agency he was serving, but also because it was so horrific. And he wasn't there that long. He was there to do a mission. He did his mission. He got wounded. But the positive side of that is they rescued 3,500 victims, women and children. They had to leave many there, and many were so far gone that they, wouldn't have helped them if they'd been rescued. And they captured a couple of alien craft, and friends, the Raptors, came and helped the whole operation. So, but again, it's something he doesn't like to talk about. So people sometimes question whether what we have to say is true about it or not, or question, his credibility about it by asking questions like, did he, what were the floors looking like, or what were the walls? It's like, frankly, because I didn't pay attention to that because I'm in there to do a specific job. I landed, I went, I don't know what, went down whatever floors. He doesn't even tell me what floors. The report does not say what floors he was on. Again, they're doing. Pardon me,
Joanne, how did they get 3,500 people out?
Well, they were. Well, there was a gun battle, and I guess they probably went down into those hellish hall. I don't know what is it called, the Hall of Hell or Hell Hall or something, or one of the lower floors where the worst stuff was going on. So I know they had to go at least down to a certain level, and they just fought the aliens that were holding him captive and rescued as many people as they can. I can't remember if the report gets into the nitty-gritty and the logistics of how they did all that.
Okay.
Again, he didn't tell me, so I don't know all of it, and I haven't read it very often.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Well, I do remember him saying that a reptilian with his craft actually was down there fighting right alongside astronaut Onizuka and he, who were the heroes of the Delta Force.
So that was Prince Naga, the same Raptor prince who introduced himself to Markstad in 1952, who had done several missions with Markstad and then with Mark throughout the years. So he came with at least one of his craft with his princely insignia, princely empire insignia that shows up on his craft, and at least one craft, or one of his aircraft or spacecraft, whatever you want to call them. They went in and fought alongside our human forces, and that really helped. I'm sure that helped tip the scale quite a bit because they're pretty fierce and they're very quick. So, and they don't need to use guns. So they did help.
You alluded to his father having contact too.
Yeah, his father in 1952. Mark's dad was stationed at Hamilton Air Force Base in Nevada, California, which is about 20 minutes or so north of San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge. And that's where he was stationed when Mark was born and stuff. But like August of 1952, and Mark was born in June of 53. The officers and their wives were all hanging out by the Officers Club pool there at Hamilton Air Force Base. And it sits up on the hill on the base overlooking the airfield and stuff, and I've been there. All of a sudden, 6, then 2 more. So it's 8 flying saucers altogether just kind of appear at the airbase. And so the alarms go off and everything, and the men all run down to their flight line and get in their jets. And lo and behold, Mark's dad's hangar was right by the control tower. And Mark's mom thought, oh, he'll come out in his jet and they'll go off and they'll deal with this. But he came out in a flying saucer because at that time, Hamilton was one of 3 bases on the West Coast, and there were 3 on the East Coast that each had a squad of Air Force flying saucers. So there were some jets and some flying saucers, and they went off. And I don't think they had a battle, but they had some kind of, I don't even know what they did, if they had a meeting or somewhere, or they just, they flew off after them, and there are no details about what happened while they flew off after them. Everybody comes back, Mark's dad comes back, and one flying saucer of theirs, the Raptors, comes back, and the hull opens up, and the hatch or the hull or whatever, and some stairs come down, and out comes this 7 to 9 foot tall Reptilian, and he is a prince from the Draconian Empire of Raptors, and he was there as an ambassador to teach the humans there's a few things, and also to try and, become our allies. So he spent several days there with Mark's dad and the other military leaders there, and they had a meeting for days, and he was teaching them about space and, what the Greys didn't want us to know and different things, and they worked together, their two military groups, for years. So that's how Naga came into our lives.
Wow. So
yeah.
President Carter had to skip the normal chain of command in order to create this rescue. Is that right?
I don't even think President Carter was totally, I can't remember whether he actually approved it or if he just kind of looked the other way, because what had happened is they had just, a group of the military, Mark and the secret space guys, they had come back from a mission in space, and they'd been tracking, our government allowed the Dulce base to be there, and they knew what was going on, but they didn't know, or at least, Mark's dad and, his branch of the military or whatever, his friends, I don't know exactly who, but, they didn't really know how bad it was getting and how out of control things had gotten. And so a certain faction of, knights in shining armor basically decided, we've got to do something. And I don't know, again, without going into the report, and I sold out all the copies of my report, so I can't even quickly look, but I don't know that he actually was part of the planning, or if he just kind of maybe said, sure, okay, I'll look the other way while you do this, or he just kind of basically knew it was going to happen, but I don't think he was part of the planning or the organizing. But, this small faction of military people put it all together. And I don't know how long it took to plan it, but...
Did we lose any men in this encounter?
We lost 66 of our human military guys.
Wow.
I don't know how many aliens died, but there were thousands and thousands of aliens working there at the time, and there were thousands of human victims. And I think the report says that at that time there were at least 18,000 aliens working there. But, dozens of species would come and go. They weren't always there all the time. And sometimes they would go there for orgies and whatever. And some of our politicians participated in those orgies. So, again, it wasn't necessarily any set group that was there all the time. I mean, the Greys were always there, and maybe some kind of reptilian. And there were several species that worked there. And there were humans that worked there. And again, our politicians knew about it and allowed it to happen. And what's interesting, and I didn't know this when I was first given the report, that the Dulce base was actually built, they started building it. I don't know how long it took to build it, but they started building it in the early 40s because Mark's dad, as a teenager, his father was involved with the Manhattan Project and several think tanks, and he was pretty close to the president at the time. And they knew something was going on with aliens and Germans and Nazis before we got into the war. There was some trouble or brewing or whatever in the Southwest. And Mark's grandfather, Richards, couldn't go down there to help deal with it. So Mark's dad, as a teenager, went down there and was dealing with it. And so one of the reports Mark is still working on, and he works on several at a time, is about this whole incident about October in 1940 with whatever was going on. And I know it was reptoids and Nazis. It was before we got into the war. And I guess, I don't know if fun is the right word, but the fun fact to say is, we didn't have a lot of government like MIB agents back then. And what you often had was certain people, like rich young men who maybe had free time on their hands and wanted adventure, like Barry Goldwater. They would get involved with these kind of things to help the government. And actually Tom Mix and other, maybe other actors and stuff, you could go undercover as an actor and be somewhere supposedly working on a movie and at the same time that's your cover. At the same time, you're dealing with aliens. So Tom Dix was actually an MIB type government agent.
What do those initials stand for? MIB.
Oh, Men in Black.
Oh.
Yeah. So because Men in Black are humans or non-humans, but just government agent or whatever, and that rings. That's consistent with what I know about Mark, because Mark always had a cover business, a public cover business that he did, something he was good at, but that was always his cover and gave him an excuse or, good reason for being gone for, weeks at a time. So he always had a cover business to cover up the military stuff he was doing.
Well, Joanne, there's been, since it was called the Defense Information Agency, has released all this information about how we had Admiral Byrd had lost the Battle of the Weddell Sea, where the last of the Nazis had retreated under Antarctica, and he had been defeated basically by flying discs, and aliens from Serbo had sent an ambassador and given us a disc and helped us build the technology to withstand the Nazis. But then the Nazis themselves, their top brass was brought over, including the people that were doing the mind splitting and torturing and stuff like that on Operation Paperclip. So they were rife in our government. And so, but in any case, we did have our own anti-grav
we did.
allies.
Yes. And interesting, because my father-in-law was part of Admiral Byrd's mission, the Operation High Jump. He was part of that went down to the Antarctic. And Mark's written a report all about that. And I know there's a section in there about, the talk of aliens and stuff being down there. And again, I haven't read the whole thing. It goes into a lot of detail about the different ships that were used and who went. But he's written so much, and I do apologize because I haven't read every word he's written. But my father-in-law was part of that mission, and we know that the Nazis had a base in the Antarctic because Mark and his dad, were both involved there in a mission later in the 70s. But and I don't know, because like I said, the Air Force in the 50s, the Air Force had a company in Canada called Avro build flying saucers for them. And another little fun fact is that, was it that? Yeah, it was still Grandpa Richards. He actually developed an antimatter like engine or propulsion system in the 30s that they used later on. I don't know what all they used it on, but I know they used it as they were upgrading the spacecraft that was part of our secret space program. So it sounds like Mark was and his associates were great heroes, and how did he run afoul of the military, and how come he wound up in jail? Well, one side of that was by 1979 or so, he wanted to retire. He had just gotten married for the first time, and he wanted to retire. And certain people didn't want him to retire because he knows so many secrets, and he's really good at what he does or did. And then also along the way, he pissed off a lot of shadow government, New World Order type people, and Bechtel being one key element of that. One of his cover jobs was like a company that was a construction and engineering company, and they remodeled houses and whatever. So one of his jobs was he was remodeling or adding on a room to the house of one of his friends. And the kids that worked for Mark killed the guy, and when they got caught, they said, "Oh, Mark masterminded the whole thing." Now, it also comes out, and Mark didn't think anything about, government conspiracy or anything when this all went on at first. Later, I think it finally fell into place. But a lot of the kids that worked for him had ties to, people in the New World Order. Somebody's uncle worked at Lawrence Livermore, and somebody's uncle was this, and oh, the man they bought the boat from that allegedly they dumped the body with, he worked for Bechtel or whatever. So all these weird connections with people involved with this crime. But when you come right down to it, I don't know if it was orchestrated from the get-go or whether it was just a really opportune thing they could make use of to get him out of their hair. Because all of a sudden, oh, looky, it's because it's all circumstantial evidence. It's all circumstantial evidence. There's no evidence that he was physically at the scene of the crime. There's no evidence that he was actually there when they dumped the body, like the kids said. And any evidence that they found, because they also accused them of like stealing some of the dead guy's stuff, like his credit cards and whatever, and buying things with it. And yes, Mark did have things that were bought with that guy's credit card, but it's because one way back in the early 80s that these guys paid each other when they were, doing odd jobs for each other was if they didn't have any cash, they would say, here, go charge a few $100s on my credit card, or go, and they all did that with each other. And it wasn't just Mark and this one guy. It just happened that, the kids had told the cops, oh yeah, we stole the guy's credit card, we went and bought all these things. And, so they had all this circumstantial evidence against Mark, and he wasn't even there the day the guy supposedly died, but they changed the date of death 3 times. The kid who did the killing never testified against my husband. The kid whose testimony they used the most changed his story 3 times. He got full immunity. The other kid that we think is pretty involved with it miraculously joined the Navy right about this time, but I have since I read deeper into the records, and he didn't actually go report for duty till after the murder took place. So it's like, So just all weird stuff. But Mark got life without parole. The kid who did the killing only got 25 to life. So it's all, and he keeps coming up for parole hearings. And somewhere along the line, he found an attorney who took his case and got his conviction overturned. But then it was appealed, so he's in prison. He's actually at the same prison, just a different section of the prison that Mark is currently at. So it's pretty odd or funny. It just strikes me weird. But after all these years, they're finally at the same place.
Is there any hope of getting Mark out?
I keep telling people, and I've been telling people all weekend, there's always hope. And even just if you put all the weird stuff aside, number one, California's prison system is so overcrowded that they have to do something or it's going to implode. It's the worst system ever. It's overcrowded. The feds have demanded that they release, thousands of people. And they should have done it like a couple years ago. They keep extending the deadline. One of the plans along the way was, well, maybe we should consider letting the old guys out, which would be great because there's a lot of old guys who just want to go home and play with their grandkids. They've nixed that many times. And the other sad thing is that our governor has said, well, we'll just shuffle a bunch of the inmates to private prisons and out of state. And once we've showed that the feds that we've reduced the number that they want, then we'll bring them back. And what's interesting is that Mark usually has a nice clerk job wherever he works. And so he is around staff people and he hears, the antics that they're up to. So he hears a lot about, the prison system's politics and what's going on. And this is the public thing that's being told, but this is what's really going to happen. And so, they're never really going to let out the number of people that they're supposed to let out. But nevertheless, I am not giving up hope. I firmly believe there has to be a way to legally get him out of prison. And so I'm sticking to that story.
Has there been any pressure on you for making these disclosures for Mark?
Well, I can honestly say my house is always bugged. My phone at home is always bugged. Mark assures me, they look at my computer every time I'm gone. My cat sitter has told me a couple times this week, I know the cat's here, but he's not coming out at all, which tells me that somebody's probably been in the house and that scares the cat. And so he's hiding. He's hiding until I get home tomorrow. Bless his heart, he knows how to hide. He knows who to come out and see if they're friendly or not. There's usually somebody that breaks into the house when I'm gone, and they don't do any damage, and they don't usually steal things, except sometimes things go missing, but it's usually they're just checking things out. Usually when I'm at a conference, especially if I'm speaking, there is somebody, and we all kind of know this, we all joke about, okay, who's the government agent at this conference that we're at? And we're all trying to kind of figure out who it is. Because they rarely wear a suit and dark glasses anymore. I've only been at one conference where they actually dress like that. But there's usually always somebody when I'm speaking, especially when I go to England, that's there especially to monitor me. I know an Interpol agent was at one a couple of times ago that I was in England. And last time I was in England, I don't know who the agent was at the conference, but then I went on towards southern England, was on one of my little sightseeing side trips, and turned around. I was like, oh, there's that guy. There's this guy there, dark jeans, dark sweater, a camera that he's not using, just looking like not a tourist. And my intuition was saying, no, he's not a tourist. And I just told my friends, I need to go down the hill now. I can't, getting some weird vibes. I got to go down the hill. So I've never been threatened openly. But I have been places where I've done research or whatever, or filming or taking pictures for a project we're working on, and people have been there that I know. They're just following me around. So that's always been kind of fun. And even when I've been in England, the first time I was there, there was a family at one castle I was at. Oh, that's cool. But then they were at another place that was kind of way out of the way. And I just knew that they weren't, it's like, what are the odds of them being at this one place and then just being at this other place that's kind of way out in the boonies the same day I am at the same time. So, my intuition chimes in, and so I have my little radar that goes up. Nobody has yes, I will say one time I can say I've been attacked, because one time I was in Philadelphia giving a series of talks one day at a workshop set up just for me. And I think it was, I don't know whether it was before I gave my talk about Dulce or right after that, and I was about to give my last talk. And I had been eating plenty during the day, so it wasn't that I was hungry, but something zapped me energetically, and all of a sudden, my back hurt, my head hurt, my stomach hurt. I said, ugh. But I was determined to give the last talk or two, and I did, and eventually I felt better, but that was the first time I could tell, something really got me. Usually when I'm at these things, I surround myself with protection, and I usually have some energy beings that are there protecting me. And even when I was in Philadelphia, that's the first time I had physical bodyguards there, because Mark had told the organizer, you need to protect her while she's there. And he got 4 bodyguards for me that were around me they took turns, but they were around me all the time. So usually I feel very safe, and nobody's come right in my face and said, you need to stop. They'll usually say stuff to Mark, and they monitor what he gives me, I think. Well, I know they do. They always know what we're talking about. And the first time I went to England, they told him, okay, well, she cannot say this, this, or this. So I'm not allowed to say out loud when I'm in England that Prince Philip was or still is, I don't think he still is, but was in charge of their space program, or so-and-so is involved in this. Because if they're still alive, they're probably still active, and if I'd said that out loud there, I would have been arrested on the spot. So, okay,
wow.
So I don't say that. And he usually checks in with his intel buddies that are still active, and, can we talk about this? Can we talk about this? Or, is this still a hot topic? He's never going to give me information that breaks his U.S. secrecy oath. Never, ever. He's going to be loyal to that oath till the day he dies. The other stuff he shares with me is either stuff, if it was part of his U.S. military activity, he'll talk about everybody other's involvement except for his personal involvement. He'll talk about things he was involved with under orders from other agencies. So he gets around it because that agency is no longer no longer active. Or he might have been doing something for somebody else. Who knows? But he gets around certain things, so he's not breaking any laws, because if he broke his U.S. secrecy oath, they'd scoop him out of state prison and throw him in a federal prison. I would never see him again.
Wow.
And I know he'd never get out. So we're not going down that road. I'm not even saying we're trying. We are not going down that road.
Besides not mentioning Prince Philip, who else don't you mention?
I don't, it's like that's the only name that I know of that would have been currently active, especially when I was going to England in the early trips. Admiral Mountbatten used to be involved with their space program before he died, and in my talk that I give about, I was going to see if I could pull it up here. In my talk that I give about the treaty conference that happened in England in 1961, it was organized and authorized by their British Prime Minister and our President Kennedy, and Prince Philip was at the opening ceremonies, Prince Charles was at the opening ceremonies, LBJ was at the opening ceremonies, and all these scientists and people. Carl Sagan was there, Buckminster Fuller was there, and all kinds of cool people were there. So it was a pretty amazing audience. So world leaders, alien leaders,
What did you learn about that conference? I'm very interested.
Yeah, what I learned is that even at that time, there were hundreds of species who went to that conference. Some came in spacecraft, so they had to have access to, it was held in Exeter, England, the main ceremonies. And so there's an airport near there that's a public airport now. It used to be a military air base. Mark said, and if you go to the airport there, you can probably go to such and such a hangar, and I don't remember what hangar, but, there might still be a dent there from when, somebody's ship crashed into it or bumped into it. It's like, okay. And some of the different naval bases there along the southern England coast were used for different oceanic species that arrived and were attending meetings there. And some of the vortexes, I've been to the ruins of a small castle in that area, and it had a vortex, and the vortex is still active today, but dimensional beings, one of the species that traveled interdimensionally and arrived that way, their ambassadors arrived that way, came through the vortex. So
what do you mean by vortex? What's a vortex? What do you mean?
A dimensional gate. Not the kind with the big structure in the Stargate TV show or movie, whatever, but a dimensional portal will open up and things come through. So, I don't know how to explain it other than that, but there's, and Mark said there used to be, and again, I wasn't there at night, so I didn't see this, but he said at night you could still probably see sometimes a blue light would show from this place, and he said it's pretty eerie. But and this little castle, the round keep is the only thing that's left of it. But it's right in the middle of this little tiny village or this little tiny town. It's pretty amazing. But it probably
what are some of the other species, Joanne? Joanne, what are some of the other species that he mentioned? Like
so
what
at that conference, at that conference, you had insect-type species, you had manta beings. Oh, I found the list on one side. You had manta beings, you had raptors, which are one type of reptilian, you had reptoids, which are a more human-type reptilian. You had some Bigfoot there that were kind of acting like bodyguards. You had various humanoid, you had Pleiadians and other various humanoid species. There were cat species there. I'm not sure. I think the dog species, the Canonians, were there, but don't quote me on that. And some oceanic species were there. So just lots. Oh, and there was, what do I want to say?
How did they take care of the oceanic species? Did they have them in tanks? Were they able to walk around where it was a breeze of air?
For some of them, the ones that are more like, there's one species in particular that is much like a squid, and to be on land, they have to wear a biological suit that kind of makes them look like a crab, actually. But for a lot of these oceanic species, they had, at one of the forts, they had built huge tanks so that they could be comfortable in their more natural environment and be interacting with the committee meetings. Probably to come to the opening ceremony, they were wearing their biological suits so that they could be walking around. Now, one of the species that's an interdimensional species to take on physical form and think of, and I love the movie Abyss. I didn't know why I loved it when I first saw it when it came out. Now I know why. And the lovely jellyfish, or the cool beings that the guy that kept going deep, deep, deep found and went to their little city. There's an oceanic species that's very much like that. So no wonder I loved it so many years ago. But anyway, to take physical form, they have to reanimate a body of a recently deceased or recently drowned mammal, whether it be a dolphin or a human. So one of the kids that Mark played with was a young girl from this oceanic species, and she took on the body of a little girl that had just drowned. And it's very hard for them, to settle into the body and to get acclimated that way. So she didn't want to eat anything right away. But, Mark became friends with her, and, they all had all the alien children and Mark, the human children that were there, had a wonderful time. But, he has known her over the years, even as he became an adult. She's popped up in other reports that he's written about. So,
how do these various species communicate?
Yeah, you got it.
That's a good question. Some of them can speak human languages. The raptors, the more elite raptors, have operations on their voice box. So Prince Naga, for example, can speak at least 16 human languages. Some of the different species brought their elementals with them from wherever they come from. And the humans, Mark and his dad and other, Mark's little English girlfriend, they all had elementals with them. So sometimes the elementals would be the mediums. They would, the raptors' elementals would talk to the human elementals, and they would translate. But eventually, the human kids and the raptors, they all were able to, talk to each other, and they communicated through their elementals. So, and the Greys were there a lot to act as translators for a lot of the species.
I don't know what you mean by elemental. What do you mean by elemental?
Okay. Elementals are basically most people call them the fairy realm. So you have fairies and pixies and brownies and, all of anything you think of as the fairy realm, they're elementals. So they're energy beings is their natural state. And, they're natural to this earth, and they also live out in space on lots of different places. So they're wonderful beings. They love this planet. I'm sure they love wherever they're from, but they're very passionate about protecting Earth. Very passionate about.
What was the purpose of this meeting again? I missed that part because I was off for a little while. What was the main purpose of this meeting?
I'm sorry, Jen, I can't stand you.
What was the main purpose of this gathering?
Oh, the main purpose of the gathering. Okay. The main purpose of the Interstellar Treaty Conference was basically to attempt, I have that page up, to discuss a treaty, a universal treaty to allow aliens and humans to exist in harmony together. And they had all these committee meetings, and I'll find the page that rattles off a bunch of those. But it was basically most of the species that were there had already existed for thousands of years longer than that. A lot of them didn't want to admit that humans were even sentient beings. But they tolerated us. Many of them were not our friends, but they came anyway. This was a political meeting. But here it was like, what are we going to do with the humans? We already know they're in 1961, they've been out in space for years. We were already going to the moon and Mars, and who knows if we were going beyond that, but we were already out in space. They were not happy with it. So the point was, are we going to continue to let them go out in space? How much technology should we trade with them or for them? How many humans can we kidnap in exchange for technology? Are we going to allow them to defend their planet or defend space? should we allow them any, probably commercial ventures? I don't know if that came into it at that conference, but basically those kind of things. And pretty much anything you'd think of as a political treaty conference. But I found my list of some of the people, the humans that were there. Dag Hammarskjöld was there, Adelaide Stevenson, LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, the British Prime Minister Macmillan, Admiral Mountbatten, Pierre Salinger, Dwight Eisenhower, Admiral Nimitz, Werner von Braun, Edward Teller, Carl Sagan, and Buckminster Fuller, just to name a few. So, and it was organized by the officers of the United Nations and the military commands under NATO. So,
when did we get in?
What did they conclude?
Wait, say that again?
What were the outcomes? What did they conclude?
The outcomes. Let me find that page really quickly. Let's see if I can. So here we go. Quickly. Hopefully I have it.
Do you know when we started going into space? We started there in 51.
Pardon me?
You said we were already there in 51. When did we start going into space?
We were already there in 1961, so we definitely. Oh, here's my list. Okay. Oh, where did it go? We in the late 40s, after World War II, the Air Force worked with the Rand Corporation to develop a rocket, and Rand actually sells the book about this rocket, and I have a copy at my home library. And it could, go out into space and actually come back and land. So it didn't have to come in, the capsule only would land in the ocean. And Mark used to train in these rockets. So it was going out there in the 40s and the 50s. And then by the late 50s, two scientists, one is related to Mark, but Dyson and Taylor designed the Orion spacecraft. So that's the birth of our secret space program, Deep Space Fleet. They designed a battleship-sized spacecraft, and we had a whole fleet of ships out in space. But we were definitely there, in the 40s and late 50s, going to the moon, landing on the moon. We probably had a base on the moon then. I know we had a base in the 70s, but at this conference, well, even before this conference, Mark's dad used to take him around with him they lived in England for a while. His dad was stationed there. And he was always involved with security. So he would take Mark a lot of times just for the fun of it, but also to check on people, how secure they were. He'd go off to a meeting, and Mark would wander around, and usually the airmen lost track of him. And he ended up in a wardroom. No, he ended up in a code room one day at some base in England. I don't know where. And, they finally find him, and his dad's going, what are you doing in here? And he's going, well, his dad tried to be mad at him, but he couldn't totally be mad at him. But, he said, Dad, they're talking about being on the Mars and the moon, and this was in 1960. And that was the year, a year before this conference. So it's like, oh my gosh. And some of the committee meetings at this conference, one was claims on planet Earth. One was talking about the colonization of ecosystems, soul ecosystems. One was continued use of terrestrial environmental resources. One was the emergency allowances of slavery of terrestrials for extraterrestrial reproduction. One was human interstellar political standing, limitations of interstellar communications, limits on technology sanctions, limited use of space by humans, military aid development on Earth, sentient terrestrial authorized rights. Those are just a few. And the one outcome I know was that there was a ban placed on open communication between humans and aliens for 50 years. So the year Kate and William got married, right after that, there was another one of these big conferences. I think publicly we heard that there was a G8 or something going on in Paris. Well, at the same time, or right after that or whatever, there was a Paris, one of these interstellar treaty conferences in Paris, and they extended that communications ban another 50 years. So, again, I've been telling people all weekend, one of Mark's raptor friends would not have been able to openly attend this conference and walk up to me and say hello, because he and we would have all gotten in trouble. And, that's sad, but that's the way it is. It's the law by this treaty, and both sides have to abide by it. And the one thing that Mark has taught me is that the whole SETI program, while it's wonderful and fun, and, we all would like to think we're helping, that was developed as a front so that the public would think the military or the government is trying to, communicate with aliens, but they're not really trying very hard publicly, or, they don't want civilians to be communicating. So there we are.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been in our space program. Pardon me?
What was the purpose of our space program?
Well, the purpose of our space program? The human.
Yeah, what were we doing on Mars and the Moon? What was the interest of the United States?
Okay, I'll answer that in two parts. Number one, I have no idea what we were doing on Mars because Mark will not talk about it, which tells me that we are doing something and we were doing something, and it was probably part of his U.S. military thing because he won't. I get the look, like, don't ask me look. He will admit that other species, and probably the raptors, have a base there. So he will admit that there are other species, and there's probably some humans up there, but he won't talk about it. The moon, what I do know, he has written in a few different reports that there used to be hundreds of alien bases on the moon. They all got moved to the far side that we don't see, like hundreds of years ago, because they didn't want humans to see them. He had written a report about, like, at least in 1977, and I don't know what we had earlier than that, but in 1977 we had a moon base. It started out in the Copernicus crater, like in the ruins of some other species ruined base, and I think we were going to build another one, but we were also trying to install and bring up this really cool telescope that would have enabled us to see far, far, far out in space. And then what happened is, and we had a contingency of Marines on the moon at that time, headed by a captain, I think it's David Rockefeller, who everybody thought and had heard he had died in a car accident or whatever, like years before that, but he was on the moon running this operation, or at least one of the officers there. And what happened is you had a couple of different kind of aliens on the moon that attacked the Marines. You also had an invasion fleet. This was September of 1977. You had an invasion fleet coming from space, and they attacked the moon base with neutron radiation, so that wiped the rest of the Marines out. And they attacked some other super weapons that were out in space. And the public, the only thing I've been able to read about this, and early on, I think Mark had me look this up, there's like one or two sentences by somebody named Dr. Beater, and I never hear any of his stuff. I don't know if he's dead now, but whatever. He'd written like a one or two sentence thing about, yes, in September of 1977, there was the Battle of the Harvest Moon, and it was the Russians trying to, attack something. And it really wasn't the Russians, because they were actually working with us, and they worked with us to fight this invasion fleet. But yeah, there was a whole, like I said, the moon base was destroyed. The telescope was probably destroyed. We had this invasion fleet coming in, our deep space fleet / secret space program, whatever you want to call it. They were all involved. You had craft coming out of the ocean to help our deep space fleet. You had elementals involved. The Raptors were probably involved. I know they were. The Nazis who were at the base of the Antarctic, they helped. So we fought back and saved the world, or I include myself. My husband and all the other cool military people saved the world yet again. And while most of us were just busy doing our life, that was a couple months after I had my daughter. So I was on Earth being a new mom, and what did I know about what was going on in space? Nothing. So,
wow.
Incredible stuff. right under our nose.
So are we still on some level united as a planet against possible foreign invasion?
I do believe we must be. I do believe we must be, because while Mark says publicly, the International Security Agency that his dad was running until he died, Mark says it's no longer active. So maybe it's no longer active in the form that it was. In my heart, I truly believe that there must be an offshoot of that, or somebody must be doing something that's similar to that. Again, that's nothing he's going to admit to if he knows about it. But I have often teased him. It's like, I'll bet you're in charge of that from here. Or, I'll bet some of your kids are in charge of that. But, he just, yeah, no, not really. He just, brushes me off. So obviously it's nothing he could be running from prison. But I hope, and I tell him all, at least I hope somebody is out there doing something like international security, because we certainly need it. So.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour. It's our break time. We'll be back in 5 minutes. See you in 5. Aloha, everyone, and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I am your host, Janet Carol Lesson, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lesson, and I have laryngitis. I sound really great. And we have Joanne Richards, who's telling us all about Mark Richards and all these incredible things that he went through. And before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please Revolution Radio is a listener supported, so please go over to the donate button on the website and make your donation. Anything you can donate will be greatly appreciated. $1, $5, $10, $15, $20, whatever you donate helps us keep these programs on the air, helps us bring more programs to you, and we do thank you very much for your donation. All right, Dr. Leslie, are you back?
Okay, well, I guess this is an amazing amount of data, and I guess I want your overview. What is the alien presence in our life, the secret, supposedly secret alien presence? Overall, what does it mean for Earth? And also, I am very curious what it means in terms of incoming astronomical threats that people that have been tracking Nibiru and other kinds of threats. Are the aliens here going to save us? What's up?
Oh, those are all good questions, Sasha. I can start with, we'll start with one of the things I know. Let me see. I do know that there is a large contingency of raptors that have a base here on Earth. There are, and I do consider that they are still our allies, because they realize that at this time, at this moment in time, it's a good idea to be our allies. So they still help us, and they also help to protect the planet from other non-friendly species. I don't have any details about that, but I just know that they do. Because this is their home world, and they want to protect it. They don't all, most of them live out in space, but they still want to protect Earth because they love their mother world. I know that there's a couple of bases of a delightful little beetle-type insect species that crashed here in 1978 in a crash in Bolivia, and Mark had a first contact with them and communicated with them. I have this wonderful quote. It's like, I am Captain Mark Richards, and I welcome you to planet Earth, and what can we do for you? And they became our friends, and he and others helped them establish a base here in South America, and I think they have a base in North America. They're delightful. And some of his kids used to play with them. What else? Who do I know? There are definitely different oceanic species that live on Earth, and I don't know, generally speaking, how they interact with us. There's a cat species, a few of the cat species that came back with him from his space mission in 1979, and they're at a facility somewhere in the southern hemisphere. That's about all I know. Let's see what else. The reptoids. Well, I don't want to talk about them yet. There's another different lovely cat species that I would love to meet. But I think he met them in 1971, and they look like a panther, and they can walk upright. And when you're not real close to them, they look like humans. I mean, not that they're humanoid because they have fur and a tail and everything, but the way they walk and their structure, they do look rather humanly when you're at a distance from them, and they can speak our language. But they're basically scientists.
Has Mark ever explained to you how there can be so many different species that look like humanoids, that look like cats?
Yeah.
How is it that there's a cat species that's sentient, yet our cats can't talk, etc.?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. My cat talks to me, but no, I'm just kidding. My cat and I have a wonderful bond. Yes, early on he basically said that the species are what they're like depending on where they're from. So if your planet is a gaseous planet, then you're going to be a gaseous creature. If your planet probably is all what was I going to say? There's others that are like jellyfish, and that's just so they can survive wherever it is. There's other species out there that are like octopus. So I don't know what, and maybe if you're from a really dry place or whatever, maybe that's why you look like a lizard. And I don't know why some have wings and some don't. The cat species that came back with him, their home world out in space is like this sphere that you go through the walls, and then you're basically in this whole inner hollow, world, and with mountains and everything. I can't remember. It might have cities. I'm sure it has cities, whatever. But I remember the mountains being described. But it sits in space where it is, and everything else goes around it. That's pretty amazing. But his basic explanation was they are what they are based on what kind of environment they're from. So,
okay.
The raptors evolved from velociraptor dinosaurs, and they still look like dinosaurs. The reptoids who originated here on Earth evolved from the raptors, but after an asteroid hit here 65 million years ago, and they ended up evolving into more humanoid-looking ones. And some of them, if they still have their tail, they can hide it, but and some of them don't have a tail, but they still have like 3-toed feet or whatever, and look pretty leathery. And underneath it, I'm sure they've got sharp teeth. Just if you've ever watched the TV show V, just think of that. So again, it's I think in simplistic terms, it's basically depends on where they're from.
Did Mark ever talk about the Anunnaki?
No. Well, I shouldn't say no. It's nothing he talks about much. Nothing like you guys. I think he has referred to the Anunnaki in the report he's writing about the Iran Interstellar Treaty Conference that took place in 1971, because it took place in Iran, and so he is going into like some of the history that is from that area, because the other cat species that we like, this panther type, Contessa Leona, for example, is an archaeologist or an anthropologist. I forget. I think she's an archaeologist, and she goes. Her big job is to go around and find places where her species might have lived or visited over the thousands of years, and she goes on archaeological digs. So, which is pretty cool. So, I know in the Iran report, which is very long, but that's the way he writes, and that's fine. As it's talking about this archaeological dig that she's on, it goes into some of the Anunnaki history and stuff. So, but it's not. I don't think it's serious expertise, and he doesn't. He and I don't spend any time really talking about them.
Okay. Do you know who built the pyramids? Who are the ancient aliens? Do you know?
I think, since Kerry Cassidy has been to interview him 3 times now, they get into topics that he and I have never even gotten into, which is cool because I hear new stuff from him because she's asking him different questions than I probably do. Or she asks him different questions than what he's writing about. I'm pretty sure he's probably admitted or agreed that aliens were involved with all that. And, he certainly doesn't tell me I'm wrong when I come back from conferences and say, this is what I heard, this is what I believe, and look, I bought this cool T-shirt, and it's aliens building the pyramids type of thing. He doesn't just tell me I'm silly and that's wrong. So I think we're kind of all agreeing that that's really how it was. because especially when he's sitting there talking to Kerry, he's talking about huge spaceports that used to be in the Middle East or in the Arabian Desert. He told us exactly where it was, but I forget which. But it's in that general vicinity, which later was basically destroyed by nuclear explosions way, way, way back when. He goes, but if you go there, like Google Earth it, you can still kind of see it's kind of scorched and there's craters and whatever, and it's like, oh my gosh. So, and a lot of the things, because again, I get this from his conversations with Kerry. They've been talking about Malta a bit, and she and he were talking about the thing in Turkey, and again, it's like, well, there's things there that have definite evidence that aliens were present, or these temples were, because of the aliens, or these things were spaceports, or these things were like the buildings that house the dimensional gates or whatever, and it's clearly an alien facility. And he and I will talk about America and the alien presence there. So, it's all over the place, and it's fun to listen. It's fun for me just to be taking notes and listen to the two of them go at it. I mean, not confrontationally, but just, like two intellectuals talking as fast as they can. Yeah.
Well, Janet has gone underneath Johnson Atoll in the Pacific, where there was, and actually had a encounter with a huge. Well, Janet can describe it. A huge. I don't know what it would be in your classification.
I call it a dragon or a dinosaur type, but it was definitely resembled a dragon. Anyway, I'm having trouble talking, but has he ever referred to any species that are really large, like a dragon species? It was a very large being.
I believe that dragons are real, and I think he does too. The medieval type dragon, so who knows when they first, came on Earth, but I believe that they are real. The raptors like to call themselves dragons, although they don't have wings, but they do like to call themselves dragons. The raptors, I mean, they're raptors, but their empire is called the Draconian Empire, but they are not the space-originated Draconians. It's really kind of weird. It's the Draconian Empire, but not Draconians. But the Draconians have wings, and they're pretty nasty, and I think they're pretty tall, but I don't know. But he doesn't talk a lot about them either. And it'll be interesting once I get more into the report about the Iran treaty conference from 1971, because I'm going to be speaking about that in the fall in England. And it'll be interesting to see, because the England conference, there were hundreds of species. Well, there were even more species that came to the Iran conference, because you had more species that, wanted to get in on having a say, or, were interested in what was being discussed. So, I don't know all the species that ended up, especially all the different ones. I know a couple, but I don't know all the different ones that showed up in the Iran one. So,
how often do they have these conferences? Are they on a regular basis, or do they just call in when there's a need?
No, I think they had originally planned them for every 10 years. So the first big one was 1961. The next one was 1971. He said because of the Falklands War, they didn't have them. And then later in the 90s, they had smaller ones like the Kyoto Treaty, and we all thought that was about the environment. But, they had some smaller treaty conferences that would have been a cover for this Interstellar treaty conference format. And then the next big one was, like I said, right in 2011, after Kate and William got married, there was one in Paris. So the Iran one, because it was held in Persepolis, that's Pit 1, Persepolis Interstellar Treaty Conference, and the Paris one is PIT 2 for Paris Interstellar Treaty Conference. So, yeah. So technically every years with some breaks in between.
So has anybody else leaked this out to the public that we're having these conferences with all these extraterrestrial species?
I've never heard of anybody else talking about them now. And that's, I'm kind of, that's what, for right now, I'm still in a rather unique position because most of the stuff we talk about, nobody else is talking about. And I am grateful, though, like the one thing that I've been talking about now for a few years, and now people are starting to talk about it, is the Stargates in Iran and that part of the world. But the one I talk about in Iran in particular, fortunately, other researchers have talked about it now as well. So that makes me feel good.
So what are some of the what are some of the species that you haven't yet mentioned to us that you that now went to the one in Iran that weren't at the one in UK?
Well, the two that I know the most about, the two of them. One is a lovely dog species called the Canonians or the Canisians, however there's two ways to pronounce it. And they look like a hound dog, except they have smaller ears than a normal hound dog. They have really good hearing, I think he said. They're just a friendly dog species, and their whole, I think they were at, I can't remember. Anyway, but they're merchants. So they were allowed to establish a base in Australia, and their whole, they're just merchants, and they export commodities, luxury items that the aliens want, not humans though. They don't kidnap. They do have a fleet that will defend their wares that are going out into space. They export things like Rolex watches, chocolate, jewelry, probably clothes. Yeah, it's amazing. And I'll tell you, there are some species, at least I know the raptor females love to go shopping. So they will go somewhere late at night, like they'll go to Tokyo or they'll go somewhere. It's not always Tokyo, but Mark brings up Tokyo every now and then. But they'll go and, maybe the human agents that work with the raptors will make a deal with the mall owners and say, like in the middle of the night when the mall's going to be closed anyway. It's like, we're going to come in, we got some girls that want to go shopping, and they go buy their bling. So, the females love, like, pretty things, and they like lovely silk scarves, and they like jewelry. They also like to decorate their very sharp claws, and, they like to be girls.
Wow.
Andy Bashago has told us that some of the transport that he's engaged in is something called the Jump Room program, and where you don't need a spacecraft, but you basically, and this isn't just astral, this is the physical transportation. I just wonder if Mark has told you anything about that kind of a thing that we Earthlings are involved in.
He's never really, what can I say? Let me think. He's never really talked about a jump chair or something like that I've heard other people talk about. He freely admits, to the people that he talks to in person, whatever, he will admit that he's been involved with interdimensional travel. He's also, in his craft, he has traveled through gates, through wormholes to a far, far away place. He admits that there is technology to do the beam me up Scotty type stuff where you you dematerialize and appear somebody else or someplace else. He will not do that because you basically die, and even though it looks like you when you reappear at the other place, your whole atomic structure has to, come back together, and you don't come back together totally the same thing. So he won't do that. Now, I know when we met Eva, and she was talking about Bill Brockbrader, and people were talking to him, and he was talking about the Operation Looking Glass. I don't know much about that, and I don't know if that's even this technology. Mark acknowledged that existed, and I kind of got the impression that he definitely knew who Bill was, but that's something he wouldn't talk about, so that must mean he was involved with that or has really good knowledge about it. So,
what is the technology with the Stargates in Iran?
I know Mark has done some time traveling. because, and I don't know how this happened, but I mean, well, for example, in one of the incidences, and this may be not exactly your question, but in one of the incidences of the Philadelphia experiment, I know one time the ship just kind of moved in the ocean. Another time it totally disappeared and, went somewhere. Well, that time when it disappeared and went somewhere, it appeared in the Pacific Southwest in 1978. And Mark and other military people knew it was coming and had to prepare and send it back to 1940, whatever it was. It's like, excuse me?
Wow.
So there's some time traveling going on there. I don't know. And I think he told me maybe, it's like, I don't know how he knew it was going to happen. I don't know the logistics. It's like sometimes it's like, oh my gosh. Anyway, so, he's still saying stuff that I've never heard of and it's still mind-boggling. But again, I know him so well and I've known him so long that I believe it, and I have enough evidence to know that he's telling me the truth. So anything new he presents, it's just another layer because he knows, he doesn't want to, excuse me, he doesn't want to give it to me all at once, because who can handle all that all at once?
Right.
Well, both Stuart Swerdlow and Andy Bishago have told us about some fantastic and verifiable, in Bishago's case for sure, time travel. Andy went back to hear Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and Stuart says that he actually took a blood sample from the foot of Jesus on the cross. And I just wonder if Mark has told you any stories like that.
Well, I don't know. Mark hasn't really described any other time traveling experience other than that, except what I do know is that he's a phenomenal historian. Now, he can tell me about different time periods just as if he was there. Now, I know part of that is because he's had some really good history professors. Part of it is because he remembers everything he hears and sees and reads, and he's got one of those kind of minds. Part of it is I know he has past lives, and part of it, he could have time traveled. Even if that wasn't his past life, I wouldn't be surprised if he's time traveled around to some of these places, because I swear, he talks about Alexander the Great as if he was on the horse right next to him. So, or as if he was Alexander the Great. Who knows? I know he has some incredible past lives. He was probably somebody important every time, but he can just talk about history as if he was right there, right when it was happening. So, pretty incredible. He told you.
Do you remember any past lives that you and Mark have connected before?
Yeah. It's funny because, I went from being a pretty religious person to not. As soon as he opened my eyes up to it, he didn't say stop going to church or anything, but as soon as I met him and after we've been, visiting for a while, I just didn't find the reason. I didn't need that particular religion anymore. And that being said, I've moved on. I have a different spiritual path, which is great. And I don't remember. Yes. So it's not like we sat and he said, well, I think you were here, but I know I have two distinct, and it's like I haven't done any regressions. I've just had a dream or the thinking of it. But I know I've been a dolphin and we were dolphins together. And I know I have lived in some medieval time period, and I know he and I were together. And some of these other lifetimes, it was like we were always just trying, we were close, we really liked each other, we never quite got together. And I'm going, honey, that's almost how it is now, because we're together, but we're not quite together. And I'll tell you, the 2011, when I went to England, my friend, who's a wonderful trance medium psychic person, was driving me around, and she lived near Dover Castle. So we went to Dover Castle and played tourist. But, I can feel ghosts. She can see them and feel them and talk to them and everything. And so we're walking up the big stairs. We're like just taking pictures of everything. And I'm taking these pictures of this room that's like probably for the centuries right next to the throne room. And a ghost is going right through me, right into my camera. It's like, oh my gosh. And, she could see it. I could see this blue light. And that was pretty cool. But when I walked into the throne room, oh my gosh, I got the most overwhelming feeling that I had been there for me. And, it wasn't just, because I'll go places and knowing Mark has been there before, because a lot of times in England, I'll go to places he's been. I can feel his energy. I start crying, the whole thing. This was it was partly that, but I didn't remember he'd been there. This was such an overwhelming feeling. Like, I have been at Dover Castle before in the, whenever it was active in the medieval days. Like, it was so incredible. I just stood there. All these people are walking around. I'm crying like a baby. And it was so wonderful. But and that wasn't necessary. It wasn't no connection to Mark. But so I can definitely say I've had my own past life, knowingness thing. So
Wow.
that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Has Mark told you how human beings got to the Earth?
Oh, well, obviously it wasn't the traditional Adam and Eve story that I grew up with. He does not believe that we were created by aliens. That doesn't mean we might not have been enhanced by aliens, because I think he believes that. He does not agree, does not believe that we were created by any one group of aliens. So no, he hasn't really said how he believes we got here, because it sounds like we must have been around when the raptors were still here in some form, obviously not as evolved as we are now, because when they came back, they had discovered that the hairless apes had taken over, because that's how they see us, the hairless apes. So they weren't happy. So we must have been around a long, long time ago. But Mark's never, told me, here's the whole truth, and this is how it really happened. I now believe in evolution, and I certainly didn't believe in it then, or when I was growing up. No, I grew up in a Christian background, a couple different religions, but I was a Mormon for a very long time. You weren't, even though the Mormon leaders know about aliens and support the military with that we don't talk about that over the pulpit. So I grew up with the traditional Adam and Eve story, and that's how it was. I was like, well, that's fine. I believe the Bible and all that. And I don't have anything against that religion, or I don't have anything against any particular religion. It's just that I am no longer part of that religion, and that's no longer my belief system. And I've learned a lot about physics, reading Mark's writing. So, I don't know exactly the whole truth either, but I tend to believe, I believe everything he says. But I check, it's not like I blindly am following this man I adore, because I do check myself and ask if he's telling the truth, and he is. So no, we've never, we do talk about it, but, and he will say that there's different species out there who argue over, which one of them created us, or, but I don't think we were just a strict lab experiment. But,
my teacher, her name is Zechariah Sitchin, has said that the Anunnaki encountered Homo erectus, the ancestor of Bigfoot Alma, and used some of their genetics to adapt the Anunnaki genome to this planet. And I just wondered what Mark's told you about Bigfoot, because it seems to me, from a lot of evidence, Bigfoot's here and among us and quite intelligent.
Yeah. He's written about them in a couple of reports, because I know there were some Bigfoot at the England conference in 1961, and they were like bodyguards for a specific species. I forget which one. They are an interdimensional being. Yes, they are here. He also mentioned them again in his report about the Bolivia UFO crash in 1978, because they appeared with his friend, the Oceanic. He also said they tend to, they're easy to hire. So he said they're, jokingly and lovingly, he's got nothing against them. They're easy. They're like big pets almost. So like, whoever offers them the most money or the best food or toys or whatever, they'll hire out to anybody. So they might have at the England conference, I would have to look up my notes, but they might have been coming in with reptoids or a less desirable or a less friendly species. And then again, he has seen them with, his lovely friend, the Oceanic. So those are the two main times that I know he's written about them. But he's got, he likes them. I wouldn't mind meeting him. So I really want to meet the cats and the dogs. But yeah, that's about all I know about the Bigfoot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Who might be in control of this planet right now?
Pardon me?
Has Mark talked about the Illuminati and who's in control of this planet?
Oh, well, what he basically says is probably the Illuminati is the most powerful of the New World Order groups. He always uses the caveat that no one New World Order group is totally in charge. So that's what's basically saving us at the moment. He does say that the reptoids work with, I don't know which New World Order group it is. It might be the Illuminati. It's probably our government for all I know. He does say that the reptoids do work with the New World Order group, and different alien species work with different governments making deals. I mean, they've been making deals for years. Let us have this many humans and you could have this much technology. And there's quotas and there's treaties that go along with the quota that set the quotas, and it's pretty awful. But that's still going on today. So there's different species probably working with the Chinese and different species working somewhere else. So
what's going on with these continual wars that we're having? Like, looks like they're pushing World War III on us. Do you know what's going on politically?
Basically, one of the main reasons we're in Central Asia, Middle East, and whatever, there are numerous dimensional gates throughout that whole region. The mountains in the Caucasus Mountains and the Zagros Mountains in Iran, and then down through Central Asia, all the way down to through Pakistan to India and stuff. And some of them are stable, some are not. Some are bigger than others. There's one in Iran that I have a whole report on that's very stable. It was the gate that Alexander the Great was looking for. The Nazis. Oh, that's the one. The Nazis came across it in 1930-something before they got into the war, and they met this group of reptilians who were, in charge of the gate, and they started, working together. That's how the Nazis were doing so well for a long time. But the main problem is you've got all these nasty aliens coming through gates and wreaking, and they've been doing it. I mean, they've been visiting that area of the world for thousands of years. So there's lots of biblical legends. There's lots of just ancient historical legends and ancient history written down or whatever recorded about entire villages of people disappearing, or groups of people going up to this fiery cave and maybe not coming back, and they would have gone to where the gate or the portal is. Monsters coming out of the mountains, or people coming out of the mountains like as refugees and talking about monsters. And there are I have 3 reports about this part of the world. One is World War II. So I have a report about Afghanistan and another book about Iran. But there's reports to reporters of people coming out of the mountains and talking about monsters in the caves, and the Kurds and when we were in Afghanistan and the Kurds were supposedly fighting the Turks, there were air battles going on. Basically, you've got really nasty alien activity happening there, and so that hasn't stopped. And that is, they're working with the human terrorists, so that makes it even worse. So that's why we have troops that have gone there. That's why we're going to need to send more troops back there. We're just not going to be able to bring the troops totally home. And that the other, and now if we move forward even more to the current ISIS, this is terrible, the ISIS crisis, I didn't say that intentionally, but anyway, the crisis we have with ISIS and that terrorism going on is you have reptoids that are working alongside ISIS. So the reptoids have had bases in Africa for a long time. They generally like to wreak havoc. They are I don't want to say rabble rousers. They're basically terrorists, and they're responsible for the majority of major kidnappings, and now they're working with ISIS in that whole Middle East region, and they want to take over. And Mark, one day I go to visit, and he goes, "Oh, I've just whipped out a 200 book about ISIS and the Reptilians." I go, "Really? Okay, when do I get it?" And so as soon as he can send a box home to me, I will have that. And he goes, "Yeah, well, it's not much." I go, "It's 200 pages of information people don't know, so we need that, and I have to talk about it." And so as scary as that is, and as awful as that sounds, that's the real reason why we need to send troops back to that part of the world. And our guys are going to come back with terrible, post-traumatic stress syndrome, because, they deal with this, and then they have to have their minds wiped, or their memories about that erased. And it's, that's probably what's causing the post-traumatic stress syndrome. So, yes, there's human terrorists. Yes, there's oil issues. Yes, the Taliban is there, the Al-Qaeda, whatever. And now it's ISIS. But, you've got nasty aliens working along with them and wreaking havoc and wanting to take control. And until we get that under control, and until our president stops dragging his feet, I'm trying to be polite on air, but until he stops his feet and just says go for it and send troops, it's gonna be out of control for a while. So that's what's going on. And that's the whole reason. Again, in one of our reports, I think it's the one I have about the Zagros Mountains. Mark clearly in several pages lays out the political timeline of what politically was happening in that part of the world, and why we needed to allow 9/11 to happen, to have an excuse to send our troops into Afghanistan because of the alien stuff that was going on.
Yeah, so we've heard reports that there were many years of preparation before the Afghanistan invasion, before the 9/11 stand down and false flag excuse to do so, but that the planning had been in there, and for the Patriot Act to lift whatever civil liberties we had left, that had all been in place for several years.
I have no doubt, because again, he's talking about the 70s and the Shah, and he's like building up this history, because his reports talk about UFO sightings by politicians, our politicians that were visiting Russia like in the 50s. And so there's been this stuff going on in that part of the world for a long time. And I knew, intuitively, or whatever you want to call it, gut reaction, I knew as soon as they passed that Patriot Act that had been in place, that that is something they didn't just make up in a couple months. That was already written. And I knew as soon as I saw them hand President Bush the notice while he was reading to those school children, it's like, oh yeah, he's not concerned. He already knew this was going to happen. So, that just drove me crazy. So, it was all this public reason, but it's all for these other private, real reasons why we had to go there. And I don't know, people may think I'm crazy, and that's okay. I don't really care. But, there's all these underlying reasons that all this crap is happening.
You don't sound crazy at all. The evidence is overwhelming that it was a stand down, a planned false flag in order to, they call it problem, reaction, solution,
Yeah. And what I find very interesting, once I finally did absorb the Dulce report, helped edit, was it was presented to the Joint Chiefs in December of 2001. That was just a couple months after the 9/11 thing. So, for whatever reason, they must have decided, oh crap, with all this other stuff that's happening, we need to tell them what's happening, or what happened to Dulce, or what the public is hearing. It's like, we better put an official report out. I just thought the timing of that was pretty odd, but and again, I don't know when that was exactly written, or when Mark was asked to edit it, because all I know is, he kept a copy of the report and, gave it to me years before I had it sitting on the shelf for years, and I didn't pay attention to it.
a couple dozen reports on your desk so that you were offering for sale all week. Can you tell us some of the other things that are in those?
Sure. I have different reports about space missions that Mark's been involved in. I have reports on, sorry, my voice is gone. Different reports on just very technical aspects of different aircraft that would have been involved with, more advanced aircraft and things that would have been involved with the space program and the secret space program. And then there's a report that he put together, kind of a collage of different articles on, how do you live in space? Just the logic of what do you wear? How do you sleep? What do you eat in space? That kind of stuff. And there's some reports that are geared for like 8 to 12-year-olds, just so they understand more about space. I don't think I had that here, but the other ones, I have reports about the English Interstellar Treaty Conference, and I have the first two parts of the Iran one, and I have these three reports that are all about the Middle East and Central Asia. And then, what I don't have, I have talks about the different alien species. I have the fuller, I call it his doctoral dissertation. He's written a very academic piece on the categories of aliens and, what they're like. And that's what I pulled my talk together from. But he also always describes several species in his reports. So I've got lots of those, and they're available on my website, edhca.org. People can email me. They can contact me. They can order them. I can send them hard copy. I can send a PDF, especially if you're overseas. That's the easiest way to send them. And, I'll do my little self-promotion. I love to give talks and share this information with people. So if you got a conference coming up in your area, have them fly me out there and let me speak. I would love to be speaking.
We love promoting your work. I've seen Joanne speak before, and it's a fascinating presentation. I'm sorry, I keep getting booted, so I don't know what you said. I got off my computer. It's just not staying on my phone here. Okay, so, Sash, do you have any questions for Joanne? We got about 15 minutes left.
What do you think that the listeners could most benefit from hearing at this time, Joanne?
Two things. I don't want to call it the negative thing, but kind of the wake-up call would be to realize that there's more going on in the Middle East, Central Asia, that whole, Afghanistan, Iraq, and all the Middle East, and wherever ISIS is popping up, there's more going on to that. And, even if you don't want to tell your congressperson, we heard that there's aliens there, it's a good time to support the troops and support, I'm not in favor of war, of course not, but we do need to get the upper hand on negative alien activity. You don't want them taking over the whole world, for goodness sakes, because they will make us a slave race, the reptoids. They definitely will. So that's a kind of wake-up call. I want people to realize that's what's happening, and we need to do something about it. The more positive side is I love to educate people on what the different species are like, friendly or not, but I really like to concentrate on the friendly species because there's some delightful information about them. The raptors, I talk a lot about the raptors because that's what I have the most information on. But, but all these other species that he's elaborating on, it's just fascinating to me what their political structure is like, what their culture is like, what their family structure is like. You look at the raptors who are straight up dinosaurs and have sharp claws and teeth and will definitely eat you if you threaten them or you're someplace where you're not supposed to be or you're definitely their enemy and they're fighting you. They can run really fast. They can catch you really fast. They can kill you really fast. But on the other hand, they love their children. They believe in education. They've got this wonderful philosophical belief system and spiritual belief system. They're funny, and they're just cool. Well, what can I say? I think the cats are cool. I keep telling Mark, it's like, I want to sit down with your friends and have tea. Your mom got to have them to dinner, I'm sure. I want to have them to tea. And,
Wow.
they're probably not going to drop in at my house. You know, they'd probably put a hole through the ceiling if they did, but, you know, but the invitation is there. I would love to meet them somewhere out in the boonies and sit and have tea and just chat. It's like, but I tell Mark, it's like, I want him to tell me stories about you. It's like, and he doesn't want them telling stories about tail, you know. But you know, I just love sharing, you know, what these other species are like, because they're, you know, it's just like learning about people in another country. You know, to me, it's just another lesson. So I love that part. I love being a teacher. You know,
I want to go back to the reptoids before we run out of time and address the issue of the reptoids. Oftentimes you can find peace if you go to the needs basis. Do you have any idea what they might need that would move them away from this world domination and control and turning us into slaves? Is there something they really need or want that we could perhaps negotiate with them so they would allow us to live in freedom and peace, not be eaten or enslaved?
I've never heard of them having a positive need. You know, everything I've heard about them, and again, you know, audience, understand that my background comes because I'm married to a military man. So, yes, he's had wonderful positive experiences and just even hanging out experiences with some of these species. But mostly it's been military operations, either security or combat. So, you know, unfortunately, that's the most. But, you know, the reptoids, basically the only thing I've heard about them is that they want to be in control. You know, this is their home world. They want to be in charge, and they don't want to try and work with us. They don't want to be our allies. They want to take over.
Are they from the inner Earth? Did they go inner Earth?
We really don't espouse the inner Earth theory. Mark has spelled it out pretty clearly that scientifically they know that there really isn't an inner Earth. It's just like I learned in grade school. There's tunnels and there's bases and there's probably underground cities, but the reptoids, they have underground bases. That doesn't mean they're, you know, inner Earth, but they do have underground bases. So they don't live in houses.
Are they living at the bases, or are they
on
the surface at all? Are the reptoids living in the bases, or are they on the surface?
The only thing I know so far is that they have had or still have, I'm sure they're here, so they have bases somewhere. I don't know if they live on the surface. I know the bases that they have in Africa are underground. And I don't know
are there other extraterrestrial reptoid species that we're dealing with?
Sure, the raptors have a huge base here.
But are there other reptoids that are not from Earth that we're dealing with?
Like a space-based reptilian. I think it's pretty much those are the two that I know that are here on Earth. I don't know that the others come here. And again, and unfortunately, I know there's people that have positive experiences with reptilians, and that's great. And again, Mark's, you know, unless he's hanging out with them, it's been a military operation, so it's not always positive. And certainly his dealings with the reptoids, he's never described a positive one. It's always combat. So,
Joanne, I was wondering about Valiant Thor and the Venusians. It's pretty. As Mark talked to them.
Yes, he was in Washington, D.C. when they were here. He was like 4, and he remembers meeting Valiant Thor. He wasn't sitting around when they were having meetings, because then his dad probably sent him off. But he remembers the beautiful lady that was with them of their team, and he got to take her with, you know, 1 or 2 or I don't know how many airmen, and he got to show her around Washington, D.C. So she's, you know, 4, he understood the good thing about beautiful women, so he loved the beautiful woman. She didn't eat much, but she was really good at cuddling or hugging or whatever, and for a 4-year-old, that's pretty wonderful. So, you know, he liked meeting her. It's all about the cute girls.
What about the story that Eisenhower turned down the cures for diseases and other energy systems? Is that true?
This conference, and basically you guys, this is the first time I've heard that part of it. So he hasn't really described a lot about what happened when Valiant Thor was here. So again, I'll have to ask him now that I've heard that brought up. I know that his dad was part of the security team when Eisenhower was at Edwards Air Force Base, or it was Muroc Air Force Base in the 50s, when he was having that little powwow with whatever species it was, the Greys or whoever. But his dad was, protecting that meeting. So his dad was around when that was happening. I don't think Mark was there, but, I can't be sure. Well, he would have only been one then, so he wouldn't have been there. He was still a baby. But
what does Obama know? What does Obama know? Does he know anything about all this?
Obama knows that aliens exist. I know that much. I'm sure
he was on Mars. Andy was on Mars with him, Janet.
Well, I understand that, but I'm just wondering, what I'm asking Joanne what you know that Obama knows.
I just know he's been at some meetings where there have been aliens there. And I also know that whenever a new president comes into power, after the inauguration, they get swooped off to another room and said, this is basically how it is. And not necessarily just about aliens, but, basically we're running the show and, you're going to do what we say. But I do know that Obama knows about the aliens and he's been at meetings where they've been at. So,
okay. So our president.
I can't say that they've gone to the White House and sat down with him, but, they've been at other meetings with him.
Uh-huh. So basically our presidents are just figureheads. They have no real power.
Yeah, no, they don't have any real power. No. They haven't for a while.
For a day.
Yeah, and he's not gonna do disclosure, so he's just not, so.
Sasha, you have a question?
Well, just the rumor that was going around the conference is that Mr. Putin and the head of China and Mr. Obama are on the verge of disclosure now, joint disclosure, and that there are forces that are trying to prevent it and forces that are trying to facilitate it. And I certainly don't know if it's true or not, but it's very intriguing. Do you have any idea? Is disclosure imminent? Has Mark said anything about that?
Mark is pretty adamant that disclosure is not imminent because politicians die when they decide to do disclosure. So unless, and again, there's this formal treaty that is still valid for another 48 years or whatever. So I don't know how they can do disclosure unless they've had a new meeting where they've decided to repeal that treaty and they've all decided with the aliens that it's time to talk. So, if we see 3 government heads that die all of a sudden, then I guess they decided they were going to think about doing disclosure. But Mark's pretty adamant that full disclosure is not going to happen.
Wow.
What's going on with the experiencers, the contactees? Why is there so much contact now? There's millions of people that have had experiences. What's going on with that?
That's a good question. I'll have to ask him because most of the time when I'm hearing their experiences, it seems like their experiences, they're in a dream or it's more of a vision type thing. And I guess some, and your experience sounds like you saw things in person in a physical form. So, sometimes aliens break treaties. They don't all keep the treaty. Kidnappings are still happening, but there are quotas for that. So that's part of the side deals. But again, when these contacts are happening, I'm speculating now because that's not like out and open in the public. Those are private things that are happening. So, and again, the ones I hear the most about are almost more like their dreams or visions or whatever. So I don't know what the percentage is. You probably know more than I do of what percentage people are seeing these more like in a dream or a vision or like in person. So
a move on says 5%.
That obviously counteracts the the treaty thing. So I don't know how to account for that. I just know that there are treaties in place that ban that. That doesn't mean people don't break the treaties. And I certainly don't. I agree. I mean, I do believe that people are having contact. So,
are they breeding with humans?
Yes, they are breeding with.
Sure.
Is that what you're asking? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are they breeding?
Yes, they are breeding. Yeah. That's
what's that about?
A lot of young women. Well, several species, because of the environment or radiation of where they're from, they've lost the ability to reproduce on their own. So the human female's body is really receptive to many species, to be able to be a surrogate womb for many different species. So, and a lot of times, a lot of the abductions are, especially when people have been abducted, young girls have been abducted many times over years, it's because their bodies are being prepared for future breeding, and maybe future breeding with a specific type. So,
you would tell me that the reptoids breed with humans.
I would imagine so.
Or raptors breed with humans.
Well, the raptors do, but they don't scoop up humans. They don't scoop up humans for the main purpose of breeding or whatever. And they're more of a harem-like thing. So Prince Naga, for example, if he most of the humans that have been in his harem, it's like maybe a runaway or it's a lonely college girl or whatever. They don't go around and pick up 6 at a time and say, now you're mine. And the other thing is, at least for the raptors, and partly because, when you're licked by a raptor, they have these great hormones or whatever, this chemical in their saliva that is an aphrodisiac. And you honestly grow to like the raptor. So, his human females that are in his harem, truly adore him. And he treats them very well. They get to go shopping, and and when they have his young, the babies are usually taken early because otherwise they're going to kill their mom giving live birth. So they'll take them, and they have raptor babies because their bodies are prepared medically to be able to carry a raptor young. But Naga and like his son when he was alive, they take care of their human mates, and they're very fond of them. And the women that Mark knew that were his human mates, they were very devoted to each other. So, what can I say? That's great. They're also not scooping. Right. They're not scooping them up in dozens and dozens and taking them out into space to make them sex slaves or whatever. It's 1 or 2 here and there. Whatever. It's different than the kidnappings for the breeding purposes.
Well, we have a few bits left that you'd like to focus on the last couple minutes here.
Do we have people in the chat room asking questions or anything, or I don't know if that's part of your show?
Yeah, I'm not able to monitor that because I'm here in the hotel room and I wasn't able to do that.
Well,
I just Cross, you have a question? Well, go ahead. What would you say?
I was going to say, if people have questions, especially if we don't get to them tonight, they're welcome to email me anytime. And if I can answer it, I will. And if it's something I can ask Mark, I will certainly ask him for them and get back to them. And
great.
And he's okay with people writing him, but sometimes lately he's been getting a lot of weirdos writing him. So,
how would they write to him? How would they write to him?
Well, sometimes they've asked me for his address, and I will give it to them. And sometimes they might have gotten his address from Kerry's site because when she posted his letter. So.
Okay, we're at the end of our time.
Okay.
So much.
Thank you.
Joanne Richards.
Thank you so much, Joanne.
Welcome. Thanks.
Revolution Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern in Studio A. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.